The Multnomah County Courthouse has a particular smell: old wood, floor wax, and something metallic underneath that I've always associated with decisions that can't be undone. I've walked through these doors dozens of times for work, but never like this. Today, I'm the one being taken to court. I see them before they see me. My mother is standing near the information desk in a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my grandmother's monthly utility bills combined. She's laughing at something her attorney says, tilting her head back the way she does when she wants people to notice her. My father stands beside her, checking his phone, his posture easy and unhurried, the posture of a man who believes he's already won. They don't recognize me at first. I've changed in the 5 years since we last stood in the same room. My mother's gaze slides over me twice before it catches. Her smile doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. "So you did show up," she says, loudly enough for the people nearby to hear. "We weren't sure you would." Their attorney, a man in a charcoal suit with the practiced confidence of someone who charges by the quarter hour, glances up from his folder. His eyes move over me with the quick, dismissive assessment of someone who has already decided how this ends. Young woman, no legal representation in sight yet, probably emotional, easy. I smooth my jacket, walk past them to the far end of the hall, and sit down beside my own attorney, Miss Finch, who hands me a coffee without a word. "They still think this is going to be straightforward," she murmurs. "I know," I say, "let them." What they don't know, what I haven't given them the opportunity to learn, is that for the past 11 years, I've worked as a forensic accountant for a federal contractor. I find money that people try to hide. I trace transfers across decades, reconstruct paper trails that others assume have gone cold. I have testified as an expert witness in 14 federal proceedings. I am, by any measurable standard, very good at following the money. My mother and father brought their attorney to a document review, not knowing I'd spent the last 3 weeks building a financial record that stretched back 18 years and totaled $341,000 in their own handwriting. But to understand why we're here, you have to go back to Portland, Oregon, the summer I was 5 years old. It was July, and the air smelled like cut grass and my grandmother's lavender soap. I remember standing on the porch with her, watching my parents load the last of their boxes into a rented truck. My mother had gotten a residency offer in Chicago. A real opportunity, she said, her voice bright with the particular energy she reserved for things that were happening to her and not to us. My father had a consulting contract lined up. They'd be back for me in a few months as soon as they were settled. My grandmother held my hand without squeezing it too hard. That was her way. She never made a scene. She just stood there, steady as the porch railing, while my mother kissed my forehead and my father ruffled my hair, and then the truck pulled away and took half of what I'd thought was permanent with it. A few months became a year became 2. The calls came on birthdays and Christmas sometimes. My mother sent a card when I started 2nd grade. My father called twice in 3rd grade, once to ask how tall I was getting, once to tell me about a work trip to Singapore. Neither of them ever explained, exactly, why the few months kept extending. I stopped expecting an explanation somewhere around age 8, the way you stop expecting a door to open when it's been locked long enough. My grandmother never said a word against them. She just showed up, for everything. Every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every middle-of-the-night flu that had me shaking on her bathroom floor. Her house on Hawthorne Street became my whole world. The smell of her kitchen in the morning, the particular creak of the 3rd porch step, the way she read aloud from whatever book she was working through even after I was old enough to read myself, because she said good stories deserved to be heard, not just seen. She was a retired bookkeeper. She'd worked for the same accounting firm for 31 years, and she ran her household the same way she'd kept client books. Meticulously, consistently, with everything documented and nothing assumed. At the time, it seemed like a personality quirk, the kind of thing you smile about in an elderly relative. I understand now what it actually was. It was preparation. It was love made into paper and filed by year. My parents drifted in and out over the following decade. They came for my high school graduation. Separately by then, since the marriage had dissolved somewhere in my early teens, a fact I learned from a Christmas card rather than a phone call. My mother remarried. My father moved to Phoenix. The visits became rarer, and I began to notice a pattern. They tended to appear when they needed something, a place to stay between arrangements, a soft landing when something had gone wrong, a check. My grandmother never turned them away. That was also her way. When I was 26 and had just passed my CPA exam, she called to tell me she was proud of me in a voice that had been saving up for that specific sentence for years. "You have your grandfather's patience for numbers," she said. "He would have loved to see this." I didn't say what I was thinking, that she was the one who had made it possible. She was the one who had worked overtime to cover the gap in my college scholarships, who had mailed me handwritten study notes she'd typed from my textbooks, who had stayed on the phone with me until midnight before my licensing exam, just being present so I wouldn't feel alone through the hard part. She died 14 months ago, a stroke in her sleep in the house on Hawthorne Street, quick and quiet like everything she did. My parents arrived at the funeral 40 minutes late. My mother's coat was the wrong color for grief. My father didn't speak during the service. Afterward, at the reception, my mother cornered me near the kitchen to ask about the estate. Not about how I was holding up, not about my grandmother's final months. About the estate and what it consisted of, and how quickly probate typically moved in Oregon. I told her I'd be in touch and excused myself to sit with people who had loved my grandmother. The will was clear and simply written. My grandmother had left me the house on Hawthorne Street, her savings account, and a small investment portfolio she'd built over 30 years of careful, unhurried choices. Together, the assets appraised at approximately $1.8 million. She had named me executor and sole beneficiary. I found out my parents were contesting it 6 weeks later, when the certified letter arrived from their joint attorney. The claim was that my grandmother had suffered from cognitive decline in her final years and had been subject to undue influence, specifically mine, in making her estate decisions. I was characterized in the filing as a caretaker who had systematically isolated an elderly woman from her own family. I put the letter on her kitchen table and sat with it for a long time. Then I went to the study. My grandmother kept 32 years of financial records in labeled filing boxes, color-coded by category, organized by year on a shelf above her desk. She had told me once, offhandedly, that she kept everything because she'd seen too many people lose money they should have been able to prove was theirs. At the time I'd smiled and moved on. It hadn't seemed to apply to her life in a modest house on a quiet street in Portland. I pulled down the box that wasn't year-coded, the one labeled simply family, and opened it on the kitchen table. Inside were 37 documents. Each was a promissory note, printed on plain paper, filled out in my grandmother's handwriting. Each one bore a date, a dollar amount, a stated purpose, and 2 signatures. Hers and either my mother's or my father's. The notes went back 18 years. The smallest was $800. My father's car repair, 2007. The largest was $22,000. My mother's down payment assistance after the divorce, 2014. Between those two extremes were medical bills, a failed business investment my father had described to her as a sure thing, loans for home repairs on my mother's rental property, and a payment my grandmother had noted simply as request for the wedding, the second one. Each note had a column at the bottom labeled repayment history. Every single column was blank. I spread all 37 notes across the table and opened my laptop. The arithmetic took 4 minutes. $341,000, extended over 18 years at 0 interest, with no repayment documented anywhere in her records. I sat back in her chair and looked at what my parents had done to a woman who had never once refused them, and felt something settle inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity. The specific clarity that comes from seeing a full picture for the first time. An understanding that you already have everything you need. At the bottom of the box, beneath the promissory notes, was a sealed envelope, not addressed to me. Addressed to the probate court of Multnomah County, in my grandmother's careful script, with a notary's stamp dated 8 months before her death. On the front she had written, "To be opened only in the event of a formal challenge to this estate." I photographed it without breaking the seal, placed it back exactly as I'd found it, and called Ms. Finch. The next morning I drove to my grandmother's attorney's office. His name was Mr. Ito, and he had handled her affairs for more than 20 years. When I sat down across from his desk, he slid a manila envelope toward me without preliminary. "She told me you'd come," he said. "She hoped it would take longer, but she planned for the alternative." The envelope contained a USB drive and a handwritten index. The drive held a video, recorded in this same office 8 months before her death. My grandmother sat upright in a wooden chair, her reading glasses on, a legal pad in her hands. She read from the pad for 14 minutes, not hurried, not rehearsed sounding, just steady. She explained her estate decisions in specific language, citing dates, naming amounts, describing the pattern of requests she had received from my parents over the years, and her reasons for honoring those requests while also documenting them. "I love my daughter," she said, near the end. She looked directly into the camera with an expression I had seen 100 times, the one she wore when she was being patient with something that required patience. But love is not the same as obligation, and generosity is not the same as entitlement. I chose to help her because I wanted to. I am choosing to leave my estate to my granddaughter because she has been present, consistently, reliably, without being asked, in every way that matters. If that choice is challenged, I want it understood that I knew precisely what I was doing. Mr. Ito handed me a box of tissues. I told him I was fine. I wasn't entirely fine. I spent the weekend before the preliminary hearing at my grandmother's kitchen table, with my laptop and her color-coded boxes. I built a complete financial timeline covering 18 years. Every transfer cross-referenced against her bank statements, which she had kept in full. Every amount matched. Every date aligned. The paper trail was unbroken and total. On Sunday night, my mother called. Her voice had the careful, reasonable quality she uses when she's already made a decision, but wants to appear open to discussion. "This doesn't have to become a court battle," she said. "We just want to make sure everything is handled correctly." You know how forgetful she could get toward the end. My grandmother had scored a 28 out of 30 on her cognitive assessment 8 months before her death. I had the documentation from her physician. "I'll see you Tuesday," I said, and ended the call. My father's voicemail arrived an hour later. He said the phrase, "As a father, I'm worried about you," twice in 90 seconds and suggested that my attachment to the house might be affecting my judgment. I listened to it once, saved it to a folder labeled evidence, and went to bed. The first morning in the courthouse, Mr. Doyle, my parents' attorney, opened by painting a portrait of my grandmother as a lonely, confused woman in her final years, who had been emotionally captured by a granddaughter who had positioned herself as her only connection to the world. He used the word isolation 4 times. He used the word manipulation twice. He delivered both with the confident rhythm of someone who has used them in courtrooms before and found them effective. The judge, Judge Callister, a woman with reading glasses on a chain, and the expression of someone who has heard every kind of story, listened without visible reaction. Then Miss Finch presented the video. My grandmother's face appeared on the courtroom screen. The room went quiet in a particular way, not politely quiet, but the kind of quiet where people stop shifting in their chairs entirely. She spoke for 14 minutes. When the video ended, I heard my mother exhale slowly behind me. What followed was methodical and thorough. A colleague of mine, a financial analyst I had worked alongside for 7 years, walked through each promissory note on screen. He explained the dates. He explained the amounts. He explained the repayment columns. 37 of them, all blank, and then he displayed the running total. $341,000, he said, extended over 18 years to the contesting parties, fully documented with signed instruments, with no repayment recorded at any point. Mr. Doyle objected. Judge Callister overruled him. He objected again. She overruled him again and told him to save his remaining objections for something that warranted them. My mother leaned toward Mr. Doyle. He put his hand on her arm. Mr. Ito testified to my grandmother's mental clarity at the time of the will, at the time of the video recording, and across every professional interaction he'd had with her over 2 decades. He described her as a woman who had never made a careless financial decision in her life, who had asked precise and specific questions at every stage of her estate planning, and who had understood, in his professional opinion, exactly what she was doing and why. Miss Finch called my grandmother's neighbor, a woman who had lived across the street for 23 years, who testified simply and directly about the frequency of my visits, the rarity of my parents, and one specific afternoon 3 years ago when my mother had arrived unannounced, stayed for 2 hours, and left with a check. "Do you know what the check was for?" Miss Finch asked. Eleanor told me the next day, the neighbor said. She said her daughter needed help with something medical. She looked tired when she said it. Not angry, just tired. I kept my eyes forward. During the afternoon recess, my mother found me in the hallway. I saw her coming and I didn't move. "You're really going through with all of this," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "You filed the lawsuit," I said. She stepped closer, her voice dropped. "I'm your mother." "I know," I said. "You gave birth to me, my grandmother raised me. Those aren't the same thing." Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, not quite grief. Something more complicated than either, something that might have been the beginning of a reckoning she wasn't ready to finish. She started to say something, she stopped. She looked at me for a long moment, and I looked back. And then she turned and walked down the hallway toward her attorney without another word. I stood where I was and breathed. Outside the courthouse windows, the afternoon light was flat and gray and ordinary. I thought about the third porch step that creaked. I thought about the way my grandmother read aloud in the evenings, her voice moving steadily through whatever was difficult in the story, because she believed it deserved to be heard to the end. I went back inside. Judge Callister delivered her ruling on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the hearings concluded. She found the will valid. My grandmother had been of sound mind and had documented her wishes with unusual thoroughness, in writing, on video, and through a pattern of meticulous record-keeping spanning nearly 2 decades. The challenge was dismissed. Attorneys' fees were to be paid by the contesting parties. She paused before continuing, the way judges sometimes pause when they want the next sentence to arrive with its full weight. The court further notes, she said, that the financial records introduced during these proceedings document an extensive and well-documented pattern of borrowing by the contesting parties. This estate retains the right to pursue civil recovery of those documented obligations through appropriate channels. 37 promissory notes, $341,000, signed in each case by my mother or my father, in their own handwriting in full knowledge of what they were doing. My grandmother had not simply defended herself. She had left me the means to recover what she had given away, should I choose to use it. She had built that option quietly over 18 years without ever once making it feel like anything other than help freely given. That was so completely like her that I had to press my lips together hard and stare at the table, until I was certain my face was neutral. Outside, the reporters on the courthouse steps were there for a different case. I walked past them. Miss Finch fell into step beside me. Behind us at a distance, I could hear my mother's heels on the stone, then nothing. I didn't turn around. I drove back to Hawthorne Street and sat in my grandmother's kitchen for a long time. The late afternoon light came through the window above the sink the way it always has, angled and particular to that room, and the filing boxes were stacked on the study shelf, and the third porch step still creaked when I went outside to sit for a while in the cooling air. I made tea in her old pot and drank it at the table. That was 14 months ago. I still live in the house on Hawthorne Street. I didn't intend to. I assumed I'd sell it eventually, move somewhere closer to my office, somewhere that wasn't loaded with memory at every turn. But the memory turned out to be something I wanted to keep weight of, not something I needed to put down. I've kept her filing system. My own records are now color-coded by year, organized in the same boxes, stacked on the same shelf beside hers. My colleagues find this excessive. I find it clarifying in a way I can't fully articulate, except that it feels like a continuation of something that shouldn't stop. The civil recovery for the loan documents is ongoing. My attorney handles most of the procedural work. My mother's attorney has indicated she may settle. My father has not responded to correspondence, which is, historically, very much in character. My mother called once, 4 months after the ruling. She wanted to talk. I listened, and then I said, as clearly and gently as I could manage, that I wished her genuinely well, and that I didn't think we had much left to offer each other, and that I hoped with time she'd come to understand that this was not a punishment. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said okay, and we ended the call, and I have not heard from her since. My father sent a card at Christmas. I read it twice and set it on the shelf. My grandmother would have wanted me to. What I have understood, sitting in this kitchen and working at this table and walking past the step that still creaks, is that family is less about origin than about attention. My grandmother paid attention to me for 30 years. She paid it consistently, without being asked, without requiring anything in return. She documented it in her careful handwriting, filed it by year, notarized it when it needed to be notarized, and left it precisely where I would find it when I needed it most. I think about those 14 minutes of video often. The way she sat with her back straight and her reading glasses on, telling the camera. Telling me she must have known it would be me watching, what she had understood about the difference between love and obligation, and why that difference mattered. I've started reading aloud in the evenings, not to anyone in particular, just to the room the way she did, working through whatever I'm in the middle of at the time. It sounds strange when I describe it. It doesn't feel strange when I do it. She was right that good stories deserve to be heard all the way to the end.